Coming. Yeah, my name's Ron Styron, and I was brought in to the University of South Alabama 2 years ago to lead an exciting project. You know, we talk a lot about developing interdisciplinary practices. There's a huge conceptual framework behind it. I had the pleasure of making a project like that work. Now, it was driven by accreditation. Our accrediting agents told us that we had to come up with common areas of weakness across our campus. We have 15,000 students at our university, so we had various committees study student data, had focus groups, interviews. They took basically 2 years to come to the conclusion that common areas of weaknesses had to do with critical thinking and collaboration. It was my charge to come up with strategies that would address those two factors. So I thought, well, now how can I make this work? You know, in terms of getting all these people to buy in from 10 different colleges, 735 different professors, to come together with some commonality to address those weaknesses. So we developed some common languages. The languages were all based around pedagogy, and that sort of drew everybody in. And then we focused on one particular pedagogy that had a lot of research indicating that it addressed collaboration and critical thinking, and that was called team-based learning. So it's been interesting to see all these multiple content areas, disciplines, converge and have conversations related to improving pedagogy based on team-based learning strategies. And team-based learning is essentially an active learning strategy, you know, where the professor's role changes. Got the clicker? Essentially, it's an action research project, you know, where we're continually collecting data, analyzing that data, making plans, implementing those plans, collecting data, analyzing the data, on and on and on. We have quite a few assessments of critical thinking, collaboration, observation instruments. Some of them are computerized, so we have a tremendous amount of data that's been generated. And some of you guys who have seen me in the past years, you know, you've seen this is the third year I think I've been here talking about the project. So we had a pilot year where we experimented with some of these strategies, and then this is the end of the first full year. And we're going to run this project for at least 4 more years. So this is the big picture. Again, it's an action research strategy. It's not working. All right, so how has it been going? Okay, in terms of numbers, you can see we had faculty. First year we had 611. Last year we had 60. This next year we have 154 faculty across campus who have decided to become participants in a project. That's a little more than 20% of the entire faculty population at this point in time. Last year, spring semester, we had over 1,800 students in various classes, so more than 10% of the enrollment. 71 different sections from various disciplines, predominantly STEM disciplines and health sciences. Health sciences is on fire with this concept, and it's really spreading like wildfire there. And most of our participants, I would say, are from health sciences at this point in time. Just some pictures of students working together in teams. I guess I would describe team-based learning this way. There was a strategy of group work called cooperative learning that began in the late 80s and early 90s. That was like group work 1.0. Team-based learning, problem-based learning, project-based learning is like group work 2.0. They've addressed some of the issues that surface to the top with cooperative learning. And for instance, you'll see these groups. I have a couple more pictures in there. Keep going. One of the things you'll notice with these groups in team-based learning is they tend to be larger than in cooperative learning. And they stay together the whole semester. And an interesting thing happens. You mobilize peer pressure. When the same group stays together, they encourage each other to come to class prepared, and they get on each other when they miss class or when they're not prepared for class. So it's a wonderful process to see in place. I teach a graduate course myself, and I can tell you my students come into class ready to go. And when I say ready to go, moving on to application and those strategies that help promote critical thinking and working together. This is the mind map for team-based learning. You know, it's a cycle essentially where you first deal with content acquisition. You know, you make sure that students have acquired the necessary content to move on to application. And there are steps that you can see in this process. The first step is titled reading, but it's actually whatever you need to do to prepare your students for the content. So that could be reading out of textbooks. Flipped classrooms fit well with this concept. So many professors have taken their lectures, their PowerPoints, and put them online for students to view as vodcasts and podcasts. When the professor feels that students are ready, then they enter a part called Readiness Assurance, which consists of individual tests and then team tests on the same content. Now, this is sort of the 2.0 of group work, because in cooperative learning, if you talk to the average student, they would say, I hate it. Why'd you hate it? Because I had this group and I did all the work, they got the same good grade. Or conversely, I care about my grade. Some students didn't pull their weight, it pulled my grade down. Well, this strategy, by having individual grades together with team grades, ensures that a person who has the mindset that they're going to coast on the merits of the team will still fail the class because they have individual assignments of which they're graded upon. Now, after you go through the readiness assurance part of this process, there's an appeals part, which to me is very exciting because any student in their team together can appeal the answer to a question. What do they need? They need a rationale and supporting data. So it empowers students. Well, it empowers them to use their brain, okay? Right. Now, if I can have supporting data and a rationale, then I could get credit for this answer. And as you know, when you're asking questions, they're contextual, so there could be multiple answers to a question.
What's the discipline?
Any discipline.
No, I'm saying what's the discipline in this particular case you're using?
Any discipline I'm using. What do you mean? On these studies? Okay, well, I'm going to show you in a second. It's multiple disciplines, and I have data that's based on this. I'm not answering your question. What do you mean?
Give them an example of like Dr. Stanford when she had the appeal for her students. What was that about? Neurology class.
Okay, tell them about it, Jan.
I don't exactly know. She developed a test that was based on some content. Oh, I'm sorry. She developed a test that was based on some content, and the students missed the question individually and as a team, but they didn't want to work together in the appeal process. Well, that's part of the condition. You have to go as a team and write a justification rationale. Well, they were able to find some evidence from the text that supported their answers. Because they did that process, they were able to get that point back. And it made them critically think, write a rationale, be able to have evidence in order to get that. So you lose those students who just want to say, well, you know, I think I was right and blah, blah, blah. I mean, they really have to give you some justification. She's able to tweak her instruments as such then, and it empowers them to feel like they have a constructive part of their learning then. So that's kind of the appeal process. And how many appeals roughly do most faculty are they working with?
Well, it varies from class. It varies from class to class. But if you have that process, you have fewer than you may think, in that the students are not just going to play games with you and try to get credit. Now, in the class I teach, it's all about framing organizations from 4 different perspectives. So some of my questions may deal with looking at a scenario and determining what frame is the predominant frame for the application of the problem that's addressed. Now, it's real hard to just cleanly pull out one frame. So I might have given the answer, well, it's more political frame than symbolic or human resource or structural. That might have been the correct answer as I saw it. But I could have another student that would say, well, wait a second, I think it's more human resource frame. Well, why? Well, because look, when they were talking about solving the problem, they were talking about meeting the needs of the people in the organization. That's connected to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, you know, that's a good point. I never thought of it that way. So you get credit for it also. So, does that make sense? That appeals?
For thinking of the rationale at the appeal point of the appeal rather than at the point of the exam. In other words, they had an opportunity to defend their answer when they wrote it originally, and they didn't. And now they're saying, well, we could have done it. It seems to me that they should lose a little bit of credit for doing it later than at the beginning.
Well, because the first time they answered the question was by themselves. The next time they answer the question is with their team. And that's how it could change, because now after they had a conversation with their teammates, they now see that, well, maybe my answer wasn't the best answer.
Or each of them may have parts of the answer.
Yeah. So it's an interesting process to see in place. After you go through this readiness assurance part, which included the appeals, the professor has gleaned commonalities in terms of weaknesses or areas that need to be retaught. So that professor will reteach those parts of the lesson. If I didn't think they got this framing concept, well, I'm going to spend more time talking about it and discussing it. Does that make sense? So now I think they're ready to apply that content. That's the bottom part of the loop. It has to do with application activities. And there's a number of ways to approach that. Many of the professors make that a learning task for the teams. They have to come to class with ways to apply the content that they have mastered. So that sort of cranks up this idea of thinking and higher order thinking by having them decide how this can connect with the real world and different forms of application. Does that make sense? Flip on. Okay, we're not going to do the video clip. I don't have time for that. So essentially, the concept is based on those steps. You have application activities. You have this idea of backward design. Flip again, Jen. Keep going. Yeah, I'm going to get back to that in a second. Keep going. Okay. This whole concept is predicated on backward design, which really began with Stephen Covey's book, Beginning with the End in Mind. So backward design means that when a professor designs their course, they first think of where they want their students to end, and they work backwards. So 3 or 4 learning outcomes, then you break that down into more unit outcomes and weekly outcomes, and then you end up with assessments and the content to be covered. Click it again. Does that make sense? So you got your course outcomes, different units, then you break up your content into units, and this is what a team-based learning unit looks like. It starts on the far left with the outcomes, and then you go back to applications and activities and readiness assurance in this sequence here. And those areas that are below the line are the flip parts of the lesson. One of the things that professors have found is that this has become a wonderful way to frame flipped classrooms. So this is where they flip their lectures, their PowerPoints, and other things that they used to take class time with, so now they can get on to application activities, which are conducted in teams. So what I'm taking the scenic route to say, in essence, is you see there's a common language going around now, multiple disciplines. How can we improve critical thinking and collaboration? Well, this quality assurance plan, they're talking about this team-based learning. So how can that work in our discipline? And although the creator of the strategy wants you to follow it verbatim, of course, professors have realized that it has to be modified according to the level of students that they're teaching and also the content area. So they're pulling out different parts, some of using exactly as this model. some are not. All right. Jen's going to talk some about the data. We have assessments for critical thinking. We have assessments for collaboration, tons of assessments. This first one has to do with learning outcomes. This is part of the, does it appear to be working?
And obviously, each discipline knows what they think their target mastery level is for their classes, so they set those. Now, they can get guidance through the quality enhancement plan. We have some mentors and coaches. So they've set these mastery levels. But based on our faculty, these are the reports of students who met their target levels and did not meet their target levels. So they're...
Faculty members develop learning outcomes based on Bloom's taxonomy. Okay? So there's the action verbs. They then connect them to specific assessments, and they set a mastery target level. So if I'm dealing with an application outcome, maybe I'm assessing it on such and such a project, I have a rubric, and no less than 80% of my class will get an A on that rubric assessing that competency. Does that make sense?
But I'm the person grading the class, so there's the person assessing it is also, I mean, there's a lack of impartiality here, that's all I'm worried about.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
yeah, and I'll tell you, there's another assessment that we also use to measure critical thinking. It's the California Critical Thinking Skills Test. So that's it's a nationally normed test.
Want me to get...
Yeah, flip to that slide.
Okay. There you go.
We bring in students, we brought in a sample this time, and we administer the test, and it measures the same domains that are connected to the taxonomy. Like I said, it's a nationally normed test. I guess the good news is that the students who were in the project classes scored higher. The bad news is that they were at the 25th percentile. I mean the 29th percentile.
29% boom.
It's a nationally normed test.